Okay, starting out with baking soda solution. I have a slight leak right here. Not worried about that right now. Just going to get these tests done. Voltage from the cell, voltage from the variac, watts. And right now we're pushing in the cell about 150 volts, and we're making hydrogen. What I've found is as the volts go up, hydrogen production drops off in the cell. And you can see there's no plasma formation right now. The water has already warmed up and been used. It's 199. I'm having a tough time getting that water to boil, so it is hot though. But 199 using 131 watts. The cell has over 100 volts in it, and we've got a 22 volt input from the variac. So next we're going to go ahead and turn up the voltage. I want to go up to 30 volts, test the output and the amount of bubbles. We're getting a pretty steady stream of bubbles. And they light. We have not formed plasma. We're about 200 volts in the cell, 168 watts. Now we have the white bubbles inside the cell. It has not cleared out. It's making a lot of foam. Anyway, so we're going up since we've already got the temperature of our water at 199, 200, actually 200 right now, using the lower voltage and making hydrogen at 30 volts. I'm going to go up to 40 volts. Alright, 40 volts, 185 amps, 185 watts, about 220 volts in the cell, and 199, 200 degrees water temperature. Bubbles do ignite. Not a lot of production, but what I'm seeing here is hydrogen production at just about 200 degrees in the cell, and the temperature in the cell appears to have stabilized. There's still about 220 volts in the cell, 186 watts, 40 volts. Turn it up to 50 volts. 50 volts, 200 watts, 260 volts in the cell. Still have hydrogen production, no plasma. I'm getting smaller bubbles now. But it's still HHO. Not bad production, but it's smaller bubbles. Alright, so watts are still about 200, volts in the cell are close to 300, 50 volt input. Now we're going to 60 volt input. Alright, we're at 60 volts, 215 watts, 300 volts in the cell. 200 cell temperature. Lots of small bubbles. Okay, but that's a pretty stable output on the cathode. I'm going to go up to 70 volts. Uh, 235 watts at 70 volts, 350 volts in the cell, still no plasma. Going up to 80. Volts, 245 watts, 380 volts in the cell, still no plasma. Considerable amount of small bubbles. Going up to 80 volts, 90 volts. Should see plasma here. $90 volts, 250 watts, tiny bubbles, and we're starting to lose HHO production. We have a good twist around the cathode with the white bubbles, but it's clearing out. We're 400 volts in the cell, 250 watts, 89, 90 volts. This is where we're stopping hydrogen production and beginning plasma. The temperature still 200, 201 maybe. So we'll bring it up now till we form plasma. Okay, we're starting to see the plasma formation on the cathode. Still got, go to 100. At 100 volts, we have plasma. We still have some white bubbles going around the plasma. It's a light purple, yellowish plasma. The cell is at 450 to 500 volts, pulling 145 watts at 100 volts. Cell temp has dropped a little bit. Well, maybe not. It's still maintaining around the 200 mark. So we're going to bring up the voltage now. 110 volts. We have a light blue plasma, some yellow plasma, and some white plasma toward the bottom of the cathode. It's very light. We're getting cell voltages between 500 and 600, 132 watts. It is still making some plasma, but not much, or some hydrogen. But it's hardly any bubbles, and the bubbles are larger than they were. So we're going to bring up to 120. We're at 120 volts, 120 watts, and cell fluctuation from 700 to 1,000 volts. Maybe 700 to, yeah, 700 to 1,000 spikes. We have a yellowish plasma with some purple, orange, I guess. Very few bubbles. There is a small amount of hydrogen being produced, but very small. Still a cell voltage spiking between 700 and 1,000. I'm going to bring it up to 130 volts. We're at 130. 130 volts, 113 watts. Cell voltages from 1100 to 1300 volts. Almost no production. But the production still has some hydrogen in it. Alright, we're going to bring it up to 140 volts. That's 140 volts, 115 watts. Cell voltage is spiked, and I would say 1500 volts, maybe more. That's 150 volts, 115 watts. Cell voltage is probably 1500 to 2000, somewhere in there. Very few bubbles. I'm bringing it up very slowly to 160. That's 160. Still 130 watts. And I believe we're getting steam production there, because it looks like what's coming out of here is steam. Very little hydrogen in it. And watts about 130, 160 volts. Voltage in the cell is probably around 2000 volts. I'm going to bring it all the way up now. 170, 170 volts. 150 watts, 160 watts, fluctuating, 171 volts. Voltage in the cell is probably maxed, I don't know, 2000, 2500 volts. Not as much purple plasma, a lot more yellow, and the yellow glass, but the cathode doesn't appear to be overheating. Keep bringing it up. Oh, we're all the way. 172 volts maximum voltage output from the variac. 150 to 175 watts, depending on the yellow sparks. The more yellow sparks are developed, the hotter it gets. At the maximum voltage, the yellow sparks began. We're down to 600 volts, red hot. Shut it down.